Scorched Earth, a desert of sand, stones, stories, and death, brought to new life in Ark Survival Ascended. After conquering the sentinels of the island and tempering my skills in the archipelagos of the center, I now find myself ascended to a new realm of Ark, brought to the hellish wasteland which is this god-forsaken desert. For the next 100 days, I must fight my way through the barren wastes, the rocky mountains, and the derelict ruins of this desert to find my way to ascension once more. Will I conquer these barren sands, or succumb to death, fire, and dust? The answer is I will, many times. Day 1. I spawned for the first time on Scorched Earth. Literally, this is my first time actually playing this map. And with the magnanimous upgrade, which was Unreal Engine 5, I found myself ogling the environment for a good minute, maybe too many minutes, where I got stuck in a crack. And then after nothing happening, I then fisted a raptor to death.
Oh, great heavens!
Respawned, I went back to grinding materials, clawing my way through the early game by crafting armor and tools, including a boomerang, one of the most OP early game items. Which of course, I went about harassing the local wildlife with it, bullying some jerboas, taming one which I called my little war criminal. But then Scorched Earth showed its true colors. A heat wave struck over the desert, and in mere moments I was left dead in the desert, drained to a husk like Crocodile does to anything that breathes. So then I respawned, only to die to the heat again, and then to die to a raptor, and then again, and again, and respawn quoting Dutch for some reason.
Arthur, son, can you think of anywhere that isn't as boring as the island?
Only to die again. Where then I finally decided to stop being a dumbass and spawn my little dumbass somewhere else. And to spawn near a river of water. And here I was able to sustainably get to the proper early game, getting equipment and armor. Where my boomerang and the severe loss of my own blood led to the taking down of 2 raptors and the taming of 1. Naming my new companion Raptard, which then I made them immediately obsolete, knocking out and taming a parasaur with berries. And with a Raptard and a parasaur, I decided to beat some innocent bystanders to death, stealing their skin for tools, where I ended up non-existing in Morellatops that had a child. So with glee, I took both it and one of the highest slots on the FBI's most watched list.
You are mine! You are mine!
Which soon after, while skinning the local wildlife, I ended up finding a fellow war criminal, knocking it out, succumbing to ADD and forgetting about it entirely, remembering it later and then taming it, and also killing its child. Which from there, having my fill of flesh and skin, I decided to take me and my crew along the nearby river and search for a temporary base spot. Soon finding a nice cliff overlooking the riverbed, which with its flat terrain I thought best to make the temp base there, which remained to be the main base for the rest of the playthrough. So, taking to immediately building a starter home at home, beginning the crafting of the foundation while also trying out some of the new Bob's Tall Tales cosmetics, deciding that for this build I would use the Western Cosmetic build skin. However, while building, I came across Scorched Earth's dynamic weather system, being immobilized in fear as a hail of thunder rained down among the desert. I don't like that. Knowing not whether it was dangerous, I clung to the foundations of my base, terrified of the thundering noise which roared above my head, until I realized that it was not dangerous at all, and in fact became desensitized rather quickly. Returning to harvesting, where I came across and nearly died to a pack of raptors, barely managing to knock them out and steal their skin, which with that I was able to craft a saddle for my Morellatops, which with the Morellatops now saddled, I wanted to see if it was good at harvesting, which it wasn't. So I just went back to harvesting on foot, gathering more materials to keep building the base. And while expanding and furnishing the foundations of my home, I found a glitch that would persist for the entirety of this playthrough, where campfires, for some dumb reason, just produced an unholy amount of cooked meat. I never figured this out, I never fixed it, and I kinda just went with it. So after discovering that, I went ahead and did not continue building as night fell, deciding that instead it would be smart to go out into the dark night and go exploring, finding a canyon/ravine, which I discerned to be the canyon where one of the caves were. However, I didn't end up finding the entrance and instead got jumped by a gang of raptors, where I eventually knocked them out and began to tame one of the higher level ones with the prime that I totally didn't get from a child. But like the deadbeat I was, I ended up leaving it behind as I left the cave, but as day 2 set in, the thing tamed immediately as I left, demanding my attention, so just as soon as I had left, I went back in, retrieving my new comrade, telling it to listen to its carnal instincts, and then returned home. which when we got back, I continued my task of finishing the house, crafting a reusable spear from the Utilities Plus mod I had downloaded, which as this is the first 100 days playthrough where I could have mods, I definitely had my fair share of those, including a Trank mod and many creature mods. Though while I continued building, I ended up getting distracted by a decent level Doed, so knocking that guy out and a Parasaur for some dumb reason, I went about waiting for it to tame, which by that point I had completely forgotten about the Parasaur when the Doed eventually did tame at sunrise. Which with that done, I continued to grind resources for the base, finishing the crafting for the foundations. However, still needing everything else that makes a house, I went back to beating trees to death and picking fiber. I meant fiber! And eventually the build started to take shape, with me deciding to make it into a barn, how original, using dino gates as doors and then building up the walls around those. And whilst gathering resources to continue building, I ended up finding a blue drop, which within I got some pretty decent stuff, including an apprentice crossbow and some desert cloth armor. Something that would be useful pretty soon as I came face to face with my first interaction with a domain expansion. I mean a sandstorm. Oh! Alright, that was like, man, someone activated their domain expansion, bro. But even amidst the clash of sand and wind, I continued building the structure of my base in an attempt to finish it by day's end, where finally the sandstorm ended. However, while going out for materials, the locals decided to try and gank me. Again, though I was able to show them how much of a biatch they were, taming one of them, which was a thorny dragon. Which finishing showing a beach bob, a desert bob, Sandy Bob? Showing them that they weren't shit, I went about finishing the exterior structure of my base, and thereafter moving on to the interior furnishing, getting the storage that I'd need as the loot goblin that I was. And when that was finished, I decided as a break from building to go out on an explorative expedition with my Para, the 2 raptors, and my new thorny dragon. Going out and collecting drops, where near sunset, my caravan ran into a massive pack of raptors, and with my neuron activation brain, I decided to try and tame the pack. However, the battle that ensued to try and tame them did not go my way at all, with the massive pack slowly but surely massacring my caravan, leaving me as the only survivor, leaving me to have to walk home on foot. Though when I got home, using some metal from one of the drops I got, I decided to craft a smithy. Wow, advancement. Can't you believe it? Ain't I just not a fuck? Then, for the final moments of the day, using a metal reservoir, which I had also gotten from drops, spending the night establishing the infrastructure needed to irrigate my home. Beginning day 3 in the earliest morning, going around and getting the materials that I would need to craft forges, mortars and pestles, and narcotics. Harvesting resources and killing creatures in which I could use their meat to split and try and rapidly spoil the meat for my drugs. However, after crafting and placing the forges and pestles, this is where I found yet another bug. The meat that I had been trying to spoil didn't actually spoil and instead just disappeared, meaning that I couldn't get spoiled meat by the normal means. So as a solution, I decided that I would need a toilet, which most of y'all should know that in ASA, if you shit in a toilet filled with meat, it'll turn into spoiled meat. But shocker, a toilet is kinda expensive. So in order to make that, I need cementing paste, a ton of metal, and crystal. For some reason. Don't know why a wooden shitter needs crystal, but okay. Starting with the cementing paste. Not trying to end up like Dr. Diddy in the PDF squad. Anyways, after making my dough at a saddle, I went ahead and went on a stone run to start. Then going down the river to where the river started to dry up, which is also where I had gotten jumped before, which is how I knew that there would be scorpions and other critters which I could and did cleanse to get chitin. Fighting through a sandstorm till I felt that I had gotten enough chitin. It wasn't. But when I got home to craft it, I found that a baby thorny dragon had somehow gotten into my base. What the hell? Yoink! Which after adopting the little dude, I went about continuing the crafting of the shitter, which needed crystal. Going first to a nearby mountain where I ran a gauntlet of creatures till I got to the top and found nothing. And subsequently I was chased off the mountain by a horde of Carnos and Argies, forcing me to endeavor through the sandy wastelands to a new area I hadn't been to, collecting drops along the way. Which while looking farther and farther westward, I ended up finding the Badlands, which within it I found a decent level Rex, which I tried and gave a shot at trying to knock out with my boomerang, which didn't end up working out, ending with the Rex knocking my sorry ass out of the area with a home run bite, throwing me in the direction of a green drop, which within it contained more than enough crystal for what I needed. However, I would still need more cementing paste. Stop looking at me like that! So I went around killing more bugs until my autism took over, making me place a pair of drums in the base, and making me hammer away at them like a damned idiot to boot. But eventually, I managed to get enough cement paste, only needing to get the 250 raw metal, which if you haven't realized thus far, metal was a bit rare in my neck of the woods. However, I knew where I could get a lot of it. See, during my expedition with the caravan, I had scouted out a mountain that had a decent stash of it. So, I decided, for some reason, on foot, to go and try and take my best shot at getting metal there. However, I found that getting to the mountain was in fact the easy part, as when I began to climb the rocky pathways up the mountain, I was forced to dodge all manner of beasts, and even at the top of the mountain where I had finally found the metal and even some crystal, I was constantly harassed by Carnos, sabers, and even a rock golem. Which after eventually beating the living hell out of me, they forced me off the mountain with barely just enough metal to craft my toilet, leaving me a wounded pup on my way back home. But finally, when I arrived back home, I finally made a shitter! Dropping my load inside, ew, that sounds so fucking demented. Doing my business on some meat, not any better, but whatever, to finally get a huge cache of spoiled meat. Which, eager to start narcotics production, I went about with the Morellatops getting a decent stock of narcoberries, and thus began my production of drogas.
Cabron, I need to see your balls.
I began day 4 with an immediate task in mind. With a nearby mountain having plenty of them, I went about getting the things I'd need to tame an Argy. And with developing the habit of making traps in the ASA series, you should really check that out, I wanted to put one of those together. So while a sandstorm rolled in, I went about getting the resources for a stone Argy trap, which it did pretty quickly. So with the sandstorm roaring outside, I decided to wait in my barn until impatience got the best of me. So I went ahead and crafted a utilities plus reusable grapple and began traversing my way through the storm and towards the mountain. Which once I got there, using a severely broken pickaxe that I had gotten while looting, I went about clearing out the local dangerous fauna, beating them to death and shattering rocks for metal, where I eventually found a decent enough Argy. But instead of using my trap, I decided to use some modded trank arrows that I had crafted, using a mod called Extra Tranks that essentially allowed me to craft increasingly more expensive darts that were increasingly more overpowered. Case in point, it ended up knocking out the Argy in one shot. Yeah, trank montages are pretty much over in this playthrough. Alas, I needed the mod to save time IRL, so we're just gonna deal with it. Eventually, I went about taming that one, and a second one, using keratin from the Carnos that I brutally murdered. I crafted a saddle for one of them, which then I used both of them to go and get metal from a larger mountain, knocking out a third Argy, which I had found on that mountain while trying to get metal, and I ended up finding that it was level 130, which of course I went about taming whilst I continued to get a bunch of metal, and eventually when I had gotten enough metal and the Argy had tamed, I went back home with my spoils and put the metal into the forges. Though in reaction to how overpowered the pickaxe that I was using was, I tried to nerf the player melee damage stats on my server. However, even that didn't work, so if y'all are iffy about the damage, I'm sorry I tried. Either way, I had gotten a ton of metal regardless, and to smelt it all, I would need a fuel source, the best at the moment being spark powder. So I went about getting the materials for it, and then crafting some, starting the forges, and then went into trying to make even more extra strength tranks. But after getting bored with that, and still needing more loot because I'm addicted to anything that shines blue, I went out with the Argy, where I ended up finding that the plateau above my base had crystal the entire time. So after harvesting that and not really doing anything important, I went back home. And while at home, I decided to take the time to craft something from yet another one of the mods that I had downloaded in this playthrough, that being Alpha's Cryopods, because vanilla cryopods suck ass now. Which after crafting those really quickly because they were cheap as dirt, I then decided to head out with this cache of slavery balls and go bring freedom to the locals, aka beating them into submission. Which first started with a little Ossiru, which was level 125, though like the deadbeat survivor I was, after knocking it out, I left it behind to tame because I wanted to go find other things to befriend. And while I was in the Badlands, I ended up finding a max level Rex who was a single parent, so I decided to pay them child support via tranquilizers and forced feeding, taming the adult and adopting the baby, then leaving the Badlands to go fetch the room. Then returning to the Badlands, finding another Rex, which I also knocked out, enslaved, and threw in a Pokeball. And for that, I was also rewarded with an amazing level Thyla, which I also went about taming like the ecological criminal that I was. Though with the addition of the Thyla, all the cryos that I had crafted had been filled up, so I decided instead of getting more from home, or crafting more, I decided to take my first venture into the death sands of Scorched Earth, which I mostly spent my time skinning bugs for blue paste that Bob can't stop eating for some fucking reason. And my adventures in the vast sands only seemed to serve to that purpose, as even into day 5 I found little of interest within the scope of that region. So being the brain rot ADD goldfish attention span idiot that I am, I decided to head home, spending the morning learning Ingrams and then organizing around base, working till sunrise, where I then decided with a newly crafted saddle to take out my brand new Thyla on an expedition, figuring that the Thyla was OP as fuck, was really strong. even with the horrendous jump bug that plagued it for the longest time, which while out and about being the biggest headache for anything that was breathing, I ended up finding a decent level Enki, taming it quickly before continuing my assault against Mother Nature, eventually making my way all the way back to the Death Sands, sinking my cat's teeth into some of the tasty hide of Manti, where I came across the true king of the desert, an Acrocanthosaurus, yet another modded creature which I had downloaded. However, I was not sure that they could spawn until this very moment, which just completely changed my plans for the future of this playthrough. AKA those Rexers are now completely fucking obsolete. Though for now, an Acro was far too dangerous to try and kill, let alone tame, so I left them behind, soon coming across my very first death worm of the playthrough, which of course my cat vaporized. And from its carcass, I was rewarded with one of the new items that came with Bob's Tall Tales, a treasure map. Which of course, with my goldfish attention span, I immediately derailed what I was doing and wanted to go home and get a shovel to then go get the chest, not before letting my loot goblin out. Oh, and sometime while I was out, I ended up taming a dung beetle. Returning home after putting away my goodies, I went about crafting the shovel I'd need, which with that, I went back out to go and try and find the treasure chest. Not before finding an amazing red drop, which within contained 2 Ascendant Yudi saddles, an Ascendant flamethrower, a decent assault rifle, and an Ascendant Phasalosap. Though, with getting this drop, when I did eventually get the treasure chest, I found myself a little bit underwhelmed, as while the treasure from the chest wasn't bad, and definitely showed a good omen for what I could get, it was really just shit compared to what I had just got. And of course, these actions led to my loot goblin taking control for a while, but eventually getting my fair share of loot. I eventually went home and put away my spoils. Though, as I attained more and more gear and creatures, my patience of a certain goal had started to wither away, and with nothing else on the mind, and a craving to finally have my children back, I took out one of my spare RGs, leaving my good gear behind, and flew out westward, soaring over the tall mountains to find the new Wyvern Den, which, falling for my temptations, I ended up trying to steal an egg, hesitantly looking for a neglected one. However, while I was trying to find a neglected one, I ended up getting spotted by a wyvern, and as an RG is woefully slower than any wyvern, there was no escape. Made worse by the sandstorm which hit at the exact same time, which of course, amongst the sands and wind and flame, my RG was quickly slain, leaving me perfect food for a nearby Acro.
Oh, well, that's fun.
Which, yeah, getting an egg with an RG was not gonna be a viable strat for me. Respawning in the very beginning of day 6, I first went about regathering my gear, luckily a not so difficult task thanks to my precautions, and while doing that I also took time to grab materials for narcotics, something I would need in abundance as the extra strength tranks, while being very powerful, as I said earlier, were extremely fucking expensive, some of them needing almost 50 narcotics per damn dart or arrow. Worth it though. But after taking care of all that, with the Wyvern Den fresh in my mind and my thirst for a Wyvern Legion growing monstrously, I went about trying to find another team known for running the Wyvern Den, that being a Lamantria. So heading out in search for them, I wasn't really able to find any of them for some reason. Like, I found nothing. Though, in the recording, I wasn't really getting too frustrated as my loot goblin helped me cope. He'd also rewarded me because in a loot drop I found, I ended up finding an Ascendant fabricated sniper rifle. Dope! However, the more drops that I had gotten, the more time that had passed, and the less faith that I had in finding a moth, as I had yet to even find one. So I decided to switch my focus, heading to the mountains to go and find my favorite flying mount besides dragons. Tapes! Anyone miss Mercy? Which in the mountains they were a dime a dozen, though I ended up finding a high-level female RG first. But luckily, while taming the high-level RG, I ended up finding a level 140 Tape. So when the RG eventually tamed, I went ahead, found that Tape, and knocked it the fuck out, taming it as well and naming it Tortilla per request from a viewer in the stream. So be sure to join my streams when I'm live so that you can be included in a video like this, and still having that feverish one for a wyvern as fast as possible. I went back home and crafted a saddle for it, then taking it out on a loot run to get a feel for it, before hastily heading my way to the Wyvern Den to finally procure me that dragon egg. Scouring along the den until I managed to find a relatively neglected egg, which like a rat, I snatched that thing out of its nest and ran like hell, flying towards the mountains, where I was spotted and chased by 2 wyverns. Yeah, we know how this goes. We flew through the clouds in a mad chase until a stray fireball led to Tortilla's demise, which inadvertently led to mine as well. Wait, what? At first this was bad, but I ended up finding that my death was probably the best way of de-aggroing the wyverns. So when I returned for my corpse, finding that they weren't there, I was able to get my stuff back, including the egg I stole, meaning I essentially got an egg scot-free. fucking free, unless you don't include me dying. Alas, I had still lost my new flying companion. Having him tamed for less than an hour, Tortilla rose from the desert, a stallion of my command, and fell from it in fire. He will never forget you, Tortilla, so taking his saddle and his soul, I went forth into a brand new era of this desert, for from the smoldering flames of his corpse, I now had the means which I could conquer these sands, now and forever. Returning home to Hearth in the earliest morning of day 7, I immediately went to trying to hatch out my new draconic companion. First, trying to see if my forges would be hot enough to hatch the egg, finding that they were not. So I went about my default method, which y'all would not know too much about that, as I haven't really played a map with wyverns for y'all yet. But alas, I went about crafting and placing a piano. Wait, what? Oh, for fuck's sakes. So I ended up placing a piano and breeding Argies until sunrise. Where then I went about getting the resources needed to craft furnaces, my actual strategy for hatching the egg. And with them placed and lit, and with the droning theme of the Overseer in the background, I praised the new dawn of an era.
Let's go, baby!
Just imagine I get like twins or something, or triplets. Imagine they're triplets, but they're all different genders, so I can start breeding an army. I'm getting my expectations up. I shouldn't do that. It's not smart. I'm gonna do it anyways. And when it hatched, I thusly named my new draconic steed, Harbinger of Fire and Death, Spicy McNugget. And waiting for my new beast of annihilation to grow up, I went about breeding more Argies. I don't really know why I continued about this other than to pass time. As with my wyverns, they would be completely useless. But I did it anyways. And soon enough, Spicy McNugget grew to his proper majesty. But just as soon as that, a sandstorm hit, delaying me a tad. But soon enough, I took to the skies with my fiery steed, which I immediately took to the wyvern den to try and get more eggs and to immediately replace this shit-level wyvern. I'm sorry, Spicy McNugget, forgive me. Where soon enough, I found 2 level 180 eggs. Twin eggs, which I immediately went home with and began hatching, tweaking just as ferociously as last time. Our dragon army is being born before us. Bring me my children! And soon the eggs hatched, birthing the twin sisters of annihilation, which I named Singe and Hellfire. 2 dragons powerful enough to roll over these sands a dozen times over. Literally. And once they grew up, I took Hellfire out on the largest annihilation this desert had ever seen thus far, bringing beast after beast to the heels of death. Even the mighty Acrocanthosaurus fell to my flames, raised down to ash by the hellfires of my steed. And they had children. Acros on day 7 was definitely not on my bingo card. In fact, I ended up getting that card twice, as after the murder of a worm, I found yet another Acro with a child, which I don't need to say what happens next. And this one I found near the den, so again, you know exactly what I did. I was arrested on the sandy dunes when it turned to day 8. I was unlucky this time trying to find wyvern eggs, only finding eggs worthy enough for kibble. Where unsatisfied, I tried to go back and find some more eggs in the den, where I was lucky enough to be able to find and retrieve a level 125 poison egg, yet the rest of the run was lackluster at best and a near-death experience at worst. So at sunrise, I finally decided to pack up and head home, which while looting on my way home, I found a phoenix! So with my wyvern, I went about taming it by breathing on it like a fucking heathen. Getting home, I went about going through a binge of organization and crafting a saddle for one of the Acros that had grown up in the background, which I would use as a pocket weapon in case I came across anything that was too powerful for me to handle on foot. And with that, I also decided to grab and cryo my Anki to go on my first proper metal run in order to prepare for the next phase in my journey of Ark. Heading to the distant mountain on the border of the Death Sands, I went to work. And when I felt I had gotten enough, I packed up my entourage and went back home, dropping off the cachet and the Anki at home to go and satiate my ADD brain by going on yet another loot run, cause me brain likes shiny colors. I also managed to find, Google, a place where I could get silica pearls, something I would also need on my next phase of progress, which I should probably stop tiptoeing about, being the industrial phase, which for that I'd need electronics, hence pearls. though I failed to get anything more than a pebble's worth of them. Collecting them through the night and into the morning of day 9, I went back home and stashed away the small collection of pearls that I had gotten and some loot from the drops that I had gotten, because of course I did. Shortly thereafter, getting on the Doa to go on a stone run, and once I had gotten enough stone, which would be enough to craft a decent amount of spark powder with flint, I went back into the base just as yet another sandstorm hit. But nevertheless, I went to work. Now having a decent cache of cooked metal, I went about using it to craft a fabricator. However, I found that I had no room for it, so in response, I went ahead and built a second-story expansion, crafting together a pretty-looking overlook in my barn. I then placed a fabricator on the second floor, where then I finally decided to take the metal out of the Enki from earlier's metal run and put it into the forges for it too to cook. Which then, to get the voices out of my head, I went out on yet another loot run where I found yet another fabricated sniper and some ammunition to pair with it. Which after shutting up the voices, I went back home to continue doing my chores, crafting cementing paste, going on a small flint run for spark powder, crafting said powder of the spark, then getting distracted during a heat wave and searching for another phoenix. I didn't find one? Returning home with little more than some loot from drops, I put away my goodies and put that cementing paste I had made to good use, crafting and placing vaults for storage. And someone in chat told me to name the Phoenix Jeffrey, so I went and did that. Later on, while soothing the voices again, I ended up finding an oasis ore amidst a sandstorm, and being the idiot I am, I decided to use Tortilla's soul to take a crack at taming them. Which, for those not in the know, to tame an oasis ore, you basically just feed it a soul, and then try to kill any of the vultures that try to kill the soul, which that's what I went about doing, fighting off the first couple waves of vultures, until I didn't, where the final wave killed Tortilla's soul. Shit! In the early morning of day 10, I ended up coming across a very good level mantis in the Death Sands, something that would be great for all-around harvesting, so of course I went about taming it. However, without Gilly, I found that it was virtually impossible, so on another purge of some of its cousins, getting organic polymer to craft some Gilly gear. But even with my bush gear, the damn thing still was able to detect me. So I knew that I would need bug repellent, which needed crop veggies in order to craft, which for that I would need to make a farm. However, before that, I would need to get the proper infrastructure to support my progression, which I started by taking an oil collector that I had gotten while being a loot goblin and placing it on an oil node that I had spotted in the Badlands. Then heading home, skipping all of my other plans and just getting straight to the building of the farm. Even crafting a chainsaw to assist me in gathering the materials, where I went about the crafting of the structures that I needed for the farm. Using stone and greenhouse structures, and for fuck's sake, I got distracted again. I went out on a naming spree? How stupid am I? Donkey? Toe-eye cabbage? How in the fuck? Anyways, I went about using the structure that I had made and actually began placing out the structure of the farm, building a nice little hut filled with some crop plots, next creating the necessary irrigation, and thanks to the dung beetle I had gotten, it already had collected its food and started making fertilizer. So then I went about getting the seeds from my Marilla taps and then put it all together, and I'd finally made a functional farm. All there was left to do was wait for the crops to grow, so with nothing to do, I went back to the task of getting industrial equipment. But instead, I didn't do that. I got distracted by crafting a cart for my Thyla. Are we even surprised? And having been distracted, instead of crafting anything industrial, I scrounged up the resources to craft exactly one bug repellent, and with that, I immediately went to go tame the mantis. At least something productive. It was day 11 in the earliest morning when I had found the mantis again. Clearing up the nearby threats, I went about trying to tame the thing, stalking it like a weirdo until I could stick a horn in it, which after some nonsense about not having enough horns and then it seeing me a couple times, I eventually managed to tame it, naming it Seth Rogen. Going back home with my new friend, where I went about crafting and organizing as I usually do, until sunrise, where I then decided to put Seth Rogen to work, saddling the lad up and going out on a flint run, the one resource I desperately needed for spark powder and later gunpowder. And of course I then went about making an obscene amount of spark powder. Oh, not that kind of obscene, you gobshite! Then the voices started speaking again, so I went out looting. And for Americanizing, where I got plenty of oil, but not enough, as I wanted to try and finally craft myself an indie forge. I say finally, yet it's only day 11 when last time I got it in day 28. So while waiting for it to make me more oil, I decided to go and turn my farm into a farm. With style! Which then, with a thirst to kill time, I went about doing some loot running, and whilst doing some of that, I found an Ascendant long neck rifle, which my luck did not end there, as I continued to loot and found my first deep desert loot drop. And while the loot inside was kinda ass, it was still a good thing to take note of, which I forget to mention that this was near the Wyvern Den. In the den, I ended up finding a level 170 lightning egg, so I quickly left the den with that, where with boredom caving my skull in, I decided to take a look around the abandoned Coliseum in the distance. Unfortunately, nothing more than some cool statues were there. Which eventually, getting even bored of looting, I finally went home and decided to hatch my unholy offspring of lightning and death itself. And fuck, I should have named it Toothless. Anyways, it hatched and it was pretty mediocre. Damn. Waiting for the lightning baby to grow into the morning of day 12, I went back to trying to craft my infrastructure, mainly focusing on electricity and some fridges for my ever-growing collection of wyvern eggs. I also crafted a chemistry bench in order to speed up my crafting, which with that handled, the baby wyvern had grown up, so I named it Thunderbolt, even though with how weak it was, I should have named it Sparky. And with little interest in trying to use it at that moment, I went instead to trying to use my new chem bench, going out with the Doed to go on a massive stone run. Then, using the stone and a bunch of chitin I had collected while I was out and about, I went about crafting a ton of cementing paste. But alas, it would take time to craft all that, so while waiting, I decided to try and give Thunderbolt love. However, its might reflected its stats. Alas, I went around going for loot and looking for creatures, where in the mountains, I ended up finding a max level Yudi, which with a little struggle knocking it out, mostly because I'm an idiot. Damn it, come on. No, not intentional. I eventually knocked it out and tamed it. Yippee! Which then back home, I went back towards working for my industrial gear, collecting crystal and obsidian atop the nearby plateau with Seth Rogen, and then using those new materials to finally craft an indie forge. Day 12, new record, baby, woo! But before placing that, the voices spurred me to go looting again, where then after that, I then placed the indie forge on a rather unceremoniously put metal foundation. Alas, for now, it would work. And with this new technology at my disposal, it spurred me to do a massive metal run, which I'm not doing a montage of, fuck y'all. Which when I finished, I had gotten around 8,700 raw metal, which could be turned into 4,300 ingots. Plus an indeterminate amount of scrap metal, as a glitch that you might have seen in the background had persisted, where just like meat cooked from nothing, scrap metal cooked from nothing, and I never figured that out either, so infinite metal, I guess. I then went about crafting composites, mostly electronics, which I would use to make a bunch of oil rigs in order to expand my empire of freedom, and with those crafting, I went about looting again. No shocker there. In day 13, I was revving the chainsaw to go on a heavy wood run, which I wanted to use in order to get a ton of charcoal for gunpowder, because I can't be a good American unless I have an exorbitant military-industrial complex that's able to destabilize regions at a whim. Not to mention I would need many arms to go about the very violent taming of Physalos, Acros, and an Oasisaur. So throughout the morning, I went about crafting and gathering, getting a ton of narcotics and gunpowder, which I used to make something called a legendary dart. The most powerful dart from the Extra Trank mod, and combined with my new Ascendant long neck, would be obscenely powerful. Though later, when I had gotten my fill of crafting, I decided to finally lay out my freedom expansion and place my many oil rigs, which when I finished that, I then wanted to test the full power of these new darts by taming a Giga, which, even though I didn't know at the time, don't spawn on Scorched Earth. Something that I would not learn for a very embarrassing amount of time on this playthrough. Though it wasn't all bad this time, as I was able to find yet another deep desert drop, which within it contained an amazing Ascendant pump shotgun. Eventually going home after finding nothing else, I went back to my crafting grind, making a bunch of spark powder, having a need to fuel the ammunition for my brand new shotgun, and some for my sniper as well, crafting a decent cache of ammo to then go and kill one of the weak Acros I had, which sounds kind of out of pocket and makes me sound like a psychopath. I totally am, by the way. But I needed its soul in order to go and tame an Oasisaur, now that I had the ammunition that I needed to go and finally kill those damn vultures. And being hell-bent on getting one today, I went out in search, finding one in the very latest night, where I went about taming it through the night into the earliest morning of day 14, fighting wave after wave of ugly neck birds, finally finishing the tame with a quick bite with my wyvern, and thusly naming my new island bug boy, Arrakis.
I did.
Which then I brought it home, slowly. I can't lie when I say that I found this creature rather underwhelming. All of its aspects of being able to revive creatures once every, in real life, 24 hours, building on it, and the minimal resource collection were really just meh to me. So unfortunately, this creature would only be a trophy for me, which was fine, but like, I expected more from this, to be honest. Bringing the big bug crab boy home, completely disinterested with it, I decided to head out and play around with my fabricated sniper, which I had gotten really addicted to using while killing those birds. So going on a little purge
Scorched.
collecting oil and drops while I was out, and then, to test my new weapons of mass destruction, I went and tried to use my shotgun against some acros, killing them swiftly and taking the little child to replace the acro that I lost in sacrifice to the Oasisaur, because of course I did. Which, with my new collection of oil, when I got home, I decided to use a bit of it in combination with my gunpowder to craft some hand grenades, the key component to taming a SOOOOOO. And with those in hand, I went out to try and find a moderate level one to try and test tame. However, I didn't really find anything, so I went back home empty-handed. But after taking a short break, different stream, I went back out and searched for a Fasallo, finding some Serratas instead, which at the time of recording had not been added to the base game, and at that point hadn't been spawning, for good reason, as interacting with them caused my game to crash. Fun! Still searching for a decent sand crocodile in day 15, the curse of excruciatingly long dino searches had infected ASA as well. Yet I was able to eventually find an acceptable level Fasallo, where at sunrise, with a grenade in hand, I went about taming it, with a strategy in mind to follow the oases that circled the map to slam it into crystal, which was way more effective than most other materials to slam its head into. But before I could do that, I'd need to get a handle of getting on it, which for the uninitiated, taming a Fasallo was comprised of the very tedious process of beating its noggin with grenades, hopping on its back, and then slamming its noggin into rocks until it fell asleep. So thusly, I went about doing that. And after wrangling the beast for well over an hour, I had successfully knocked him out, taming the beast with Prime and naming them Sandworm. As I just said, it took 1 hour, 18 grenades, and plenty of brain cells, but I finally managed to tame it. Though with that tamed, and my voice is starting to demand me to do it, I went on another loot run, eventually taking the Fasallo home and using it briefly to see whether it was truly the best flint gatherer. It was, by a hefty mile, which after even a small and quick session of getting flint, I was able to use it to craft a ton of spark powder. To this point, nothing, and I mean nothing, had come even close to getting the amount of flint that this thing could. And with a massive amount of spark powder as my reward, I could cement the fact that the Fasallo was indeed worthy of every second that it took to tame it, and I would do it again. Literally. In the morning of day 16, I went out to go and retrieve my RG Sandstorm, as I had brought it with me to try and tame the Fasallo, but I had to leave it behind during the process. And once I collected it, the voices spoke up again, and the loot just filled into my pockets after that. But once I got home, I wanted to turn the rest of the flint I'd gotten from the Sandworm into spark powder, but for that I would need stone, so with the Doed, I went out and got it. Which afterwards, I went about crafting the spark powder and gunpowder and an industrial grill because my fat ass didn't have enough food apparently, even with the glitch. And then in the late afternoon, after doing some American ventures and getting oil from my many refineries, I went back home and used said oil to finally craft myself an industrial cooker, the most important component that I would need for my kibble operation. Now for those who have watched my 100 Days Before, y'all will know that I didn't exactly have a keenness for kibble, but after playing through the ASA series, you really should go and watch that, like, after this video, immediately, I found that kibble was extremely useful and was far easier to obtain than I thought before. And then back to the craft in the earliest part of day 17, getting ever more gunpowder and then using said gunpowder to craft some rocket ammo, something that would be useful for one of my main goals moving forward, which was taming a golem, which then I went to go out and look for. I really hate the spawns in this game sometimes. After taking a break from the delusionally long search for a golem, I again went back out, but this time not for a golem, but for an acro. Though because of updates to the mod, they had slowly become ever more rare, and unfortunately for my sanity, would become even more rare as the playthrough went on. Either way, I went on looking, coming across a ruined city, which as the nerd I am, I thought it was connected to the lore city of Nosti, which I wasn't wrong, as I ended up finding a cave within the church, crawling through the caverns to find the massive ruins of what was indeed the old city of Nosti. Which, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just go watch Neddy the Noodle, you'll get all the information you need there. Besides just the lore intrigue, I was also able to tame an Onyx that had gotten stuck in a wall. This tame will never be mentioned again, and after fighting my way through the many creatures of this cave and grappling through the mighty caverns with a grappling hook, I eventually got to the end, collecting my first artifact of the playthrough. The artifact of the Destroyer down, 2 more to go. It was day 18 when I left the cave, and as quick as I left the cave, I went back to searching for approximately 5 minutes before my patience went out the window and I just went back home, where I went back into grinding for materials yet again for spark powder and cementing paste, which while harvesting, disliking the amount of sand I was wasting, needing a project to work on to kill time, and wanting to try and give the spawn some relaxing from my constant searching, I decided to try and expand my base and create a proper Adobe abode. So keeping the sand I had gotten while getting stone and collecting cactus sap, I then began crafting clay, which would be the main component for crafting the adobe structures. Which soon enough, after getting plenty of resources, I went about crafting the structures and placing out the beginnings of a foundation for a wall, wanting to make a small fortress atop a small cliff near my base. Shit. Well, with the chainsaw broken and me kinda wanting a break from grinding, I went out to go and get oil from my refineries, where after a binge of looting, I decided to head back home. First crafting some feeding troughs for my tames, and then diving back into building. After finishing the wall for the most part, I took a break, but when I came back, I went back to it, only taking a pause at night to finally go and get me some pearls from the creek, where I finished my collection in the morning of day 20, where my ADD kicked in and I started wandering around for no reason. Going home after my spurt of lost attention span, I went and did another small flint run with Sandworm, then returning to the base building grind. Finishing the basic framework of the main house, I took a quick break to go on a meat run in a search for other acros with Hellhound. The hunting going into day 21, where I was able to kill a worm, but there was no audio, so here's my best rendition of what it sounded like. Anyways, finding nothing, I went back home. Getting back home, I went about finishing my new house and fort, working into the night, and finally finishing the construction of my new abode in the morning of day 22, where I decided to make the barn into a dedicated workshop. Taking all my personal stuff into the new home, moving the indie forge into the barn, and reorganizing my crafting stations, where I also went about crafting some furnishings for my new house, mainly things to power and light it, where eventually by nightfall, I had finished all of that, moving Spicy McNugget and Jeffrey into the citadel of the fort as they were my special tames. And then, in the earliest morning of day 23, I went out on Hellfire to yet again go on the search for an acro or a golem. However, yet again, I was cursed to find nothing, so in boredom, I went and ran the Wyvern Den, getting my greedy little clutches on a level 125 lightning egg and a level 175 poison egg. Which, thank God, only shortly after leaving the den, I found a level 100 acro, which I went about taming, with yet again no audio, so I can't do a taming montage. Impersonation time! So after relentlessly bullying the creature, I ended up knocking it out fairly quickly, and then taming it just as so, where when it finished, I named it Abomination, taming it out at level 150 with some decent stats. Which with that, I went back out on the look for more, finding nothing, and instead finding a red drop with an Ascendant Chainsaw. Holy shit, that's actually good. It also gave me a second chem bench, which with all my goodies, and I need to stop looking or I would lose my mind, I went home, putting away all of those goodies, placing my new chem bench, and then with that finished, I went back out on Abomination for a leveling run, where Arrakis decided to amalgamate with the sky. Now you're... What the fuck is that? Arrakis, what happened to you, buddy? I was crafting more ammunition in the earliest morning of day 24, preparing to tame another Fasallo. Hopefully a female, so I could breed them and not have to worry about taming another one. Hopefully. And while working that around base, at sunrise, I ended up finding a high-level Anki and Doed wandering about base, which of course, I went about knocking out and taming. Whereafter I went out on a quick loot run while I was waiting for them to tame, and when I got back, I found that they had both fallen through the floor for some reason. Thankfully, the Doed didn't go too deep, but the Anki was woefully unattainable. Disregarding that small issue, I went back to my crafting, eventually gathering enough ammo to where I felt comfortable with the stash I had gathered. And with that, I went out looking for acros and Fasallos, finding a level 105 female Fasallo, which with my new stash of grenades, I began the taming process. Which this went on into day 25, struggling with the terrain, but steadily managing to knock it out, where in the mid-morning, it did just that. So I began taming her, and then upon her acceptance into my ranks, I named her Destrier, which at the time sounded really cool, but with hindsight didn't really fit at all. Alas, that was her name still. But with that finished, I then decided to go to the den, finding a level 110 lightning egg before heading back out on the look for acros, where I managed to find a level 125 female, the perfect mate to begin a breeding pair. So going about the brutal process of knocking it out, beating it senseless with shotgun ammo and stuffing narcotics in her mouth till she passed out, and then taming and naming her Earthquake, which with hindsight would have been a way better name for the Fasallo, but I guess it's too late now. And with that, I went back out, finding nothing. So at sunset, I went back home, putting away all my goodies and showing off the new gals to Sandworm and Abomination. 2 breeding pairs made in one day. I did a damn good job. Which with that, it confirmed that my boss army would be nothing but acros. Though, with nothing else really to do, I went about hatching the decent wyvern eggs that I had collected up to this point. Hatching them all out, where most were, let's face it, dog shit. However, the poison wyvern was mad good. So I named this prodigal poison wyvern toxic. And in the morning of day 26, they had all grown up, where I then organized a mediocre entourage of poor wyverns, and thusly gave them names as well, naming them Baby Food, Sandy Wing, Skrill, Electro, and Steve. Which with them grown, I wanted to test them out, and test their friendly fire abilities with the very first acros that I had gotten during this playthrough. Though, with not much else that I wanted to do, I decided to try and go into the nearby canyon that was near base, feeling certain that there was an artifact cave in there, and I was right. Eventually finding one of the entrances on one of the cliffs within the canyon, where I thusly entered it and began my run of the cave. Eventually clambering my way through to find the end, where I collected the artifact of the Gatekeeper. And whilst on my way out, I ended up hearing a bee, something that I kept in mind for later. Which with getting the second out of 3 artifacts, it made me desire to get the other tributes needed for the boss fight, which was just a bunch of wyvern talons. So I went to the wyvern den again. And once there, I killed every single wyvern that was in my sightlines. And by day 27, I was finished with the den, collecting plenty of talons and plenty of, frankly, dog shit eggs. But they would be good for kibble, so... bananas! Which that's what I went about working on next. Returning home with the giant clutch and putting them away into the industrial cooker. Which next I began gathering the ingredients I would need to make extraordinary kibble. One of the main components being Lazarus chowder, which it itself was pretty cheap, needing some varying berries and narcotics. So I went about gathering the necessary resources and crafting those. However, I also found out that the kibble needed honey to make. Guess it's a good thing I kept in mind that bee noise earlier. Which with a hunger to get kibble, I quickly went about getting rare flowers from nearby bushes, and went into the ravine looking to find that bee, which soon enough I did, and I went about taming it, which was pretty quick in it itself. Which when it did tame, I ended up getting her followers as well, and because I'm an idiot and a psychopath, I decided to go on a little purge with them. Which while doing that, I ended up finding a second queen bee, which I also went about taming, but this time with her children I kinda just left them in there as I went back home. Though, once I got these 2 queens placed into the farm, I would still need to wait for the honey, so... while waiting, I just went about doing a bunch of cleaning and chores, which is boring, so skip! The recording for the second half of this day occurred after an update had been released for the Arc Edition's Acro, with there being the addition of a Scorched variant, which that made me want to go get some, and also made me want to use them for the Legion against the Manticore instead of the regulars. So all the regulars that I had gotten were now pointless. This decision I would regret for the rest of this playthrough. So I went out looking, both for golems and these new acros, where I found that they were increasingly more rare than their old counterparts. So eventually I turned primarily to the search for golems, which were just as rare, but I looked for them anyways. Fucking kill me. Though I realized if I was going to spend so much time looking for them that I might as well be prepared, so I went back home to go and prepare something for taming a golem. Which, because I'm an idiot, I decided to strap a cannon to the cart that was strapped on my thyla, so that I could attempt to try and hit the golem in the face with a cannonball and then run away. Like a puss. It was day 28 when I had finished putting together my contraption, but I would still need to find a golem. And feeling that searching from the air was becoming inadequate, I decided to go out searching on foot, heading out with Abomination and going into the mountains with a side mission to drop by the Cave of the Crag, which I researched and found that it was in the northeastern mountains. Which then I went out looking, going on, and on, and on, and on, and on, and on looking, finding nothing. So eventually I gave up and then just went to the cave, finding it and entering it, where I began to run it, which this cave was by far the most dangerous, having many more creatures than the other caves, including wolves and a pebble golem. So they do spawn. Anyways, fighting my way through the cave, gathering silica pearls in the water, and eventually getting the artifact, I made my way out, coming across another golem, and near its corpse I ended up finding a decent level capro, which will never be mentioned again. I was out on Sandworm in day 29, doing a flint run, where I tested out some of the might of a Vassala, where I determined, yeah, it was only really good for flint. Which after the sun had rose, I returned home with an inhumane amount of flint, which I stashed away, and with that, I would never need to do a flint run again. Bullshit! Which with that done, and me being tired of looking and still needing more tributes, I went forth to go and run the Wyvern Den, where while I was venturing through the carnage of collecting talons, I found my very first Alpha Wyvern, killing it post-haste, which it gave me an Ascendant crossbow as a reward. I also managed to collect many more eggs for kibble, and also managed to find a level 170 lightning egg, one that would hopefully be better than Thunderbolt. Returning home in the late afternoon, I went about turning the bad eggs into kibble finally. Not that the bee said finally, made some honey. Emphasis on some. But soon enough I had acquired my first bits of kibble, which I put away into the fridges along with the 170 egg, not wanting to hatch it at the moment. Instead, deciding to go out on the search for more acros. Kill me now. Though even searching through the night and into day 30, I found nothing. Shocker. So in the morning, I packed up and went back home. Only for me to crash and get sent back to the desert, so I took that as an omen to keep looking, instead going out to search for golems. The omen was wrong. I found nothing. Yet I was still determined, and figuring the flying around in search wasn't working, I decided this time to search from the land, taking my Thyla and its cannon and going through the rocks and the sands in search of a golem, where I didn't find one. But I did manage to finally find a decent level of Mantria, which I went about taming, naming them Floofy Little Doo, 'cause it's a floofy little doo. And then I went back out searching, and searching, and searching, and ooh, look at Enki! And when it tamed, chat wanted me to name it Blueberry, and while that guy was named, they also wanted me to name the Thyla Kaboom Cat, which is what I did, cause funny name. And then I went out back looking. Man, I'm really getting tired of these shit spawn rates. I was still looking in day 31, still not finding a golem, but I did find a decent level thorny dragon, which I wanted both to help complete my collection of scorched creatures and for its ability to drastically reduce the weight of wood, so of course I tamed it, and then I went back out looking, and when I grew tired of looking on foot, I went back home and got toxin, and went out back looking. As expected, I found nothing going into day 32. And realizing that I didn't know what golems actually looked like in ASA, I decided to spawn one in to see what they looked like. And to say for sure, they definitely blend in with their environment way better than they did in ASE, which might have been part of the problem. Except not because I had fucking goggles! After disposing of it and experimenting with a few more, I went back out looking, and still unaware of the fact that Gigas didn't spawn, I looked where I thought they spawned. And of course, I found nothing. But after a while, feeling unaccomplished and tired, and recently getting a good saddle, I decided to go and tame some Arthropluras, taming a low level first, and then a high level 140, which I named Big Bug Bub. Back home, still feeling unaccomplished, and thinking maybe that leaving the spawns alone would let something actually spawn in, and also having a decent amount of leftover resources from when I built the fort, I decided to go and build an outpost, preferably near the den. So grabbing Sandstorm, Seth Rogen, the newer Doed, the new Enki, the Thorny Dragon, and crafting a bunch of industrial gear to furnish the outpost, I went out in the late night in search for a base spot. Oh, look, a base. Shut up! In the morning of day 33, I found a really good cliff outcrop right over the Wyvern Den, which also having the perk of having an amazing view over the desert, I decided to build there, laying out all my harvesters atop the cliff, and then beginning the grind to craft even more structures. Though while beginning the grind, I ended up finding a high-level Kentro, and not needing it, I tamed it anyways, because spiky boy cool, I guess. I also decided to go around naming my harvesters, naming the Thorny Dragon Splinter Cell and the Doed Harden, cuz
the balls harden.
Which then I went back to grinding, where while I was atop a mountain getting cactus sap, I found a little dude, a high-level Microraptor, which I thought was neat, so I stole its soul and made it mine. Back at the outpost at sunset, having gotten a lot of resources, I went about finally placing out the foundation of the structure, planning on just making a simple overlook as the base, building it into day 34, and eventually finishing the main structure, furnishing the base with my industrial gear, and dubbing the base D's Outpost. I finished in the late morning, which really needing a break from building, I decided to take to the skies with Singe, who I hadn't used to this point, even though she was a good stat wyvern. And of course, she was also Hellfire's twin sister, so why haven't I not used her? Because I'm stupid. Anyways, after ogling base, I went down into the Wyvern Den to do a run, starting the run with a decent spurt, getting a level 110 Poison Egg and a level 165 Fire, but since Singe was unleveled, I had to take an air of caution, using my guns to clear out portions of the den before taking in Singe to finish clearing it out. And while doing so, I started to notice that the den was spawning an insane amount of wyverns, with each chunk infested with dozens of them, which soon enough came to be way too much for me and Singe, where me and her were eventually ran out by an alpha wyvern and a horde of wyverns behind it, where I accidentally lured them to the outpost. So heading home, I switched over to Hellfire, returning to the den to show them biatches who's boss. And when I finished that, I found that the den was just as infested as it was when I left, if not even more so. But as Hellfire is Hellfire, I did pretty well at muscling through it, getting a level 155 fire egg. But again, I ran into a massive flock of wyverns, and being a little cocky, I decided to just sit amongst them and spit and bite them to death. Which would be my downfall, as while I sat still, one of the fire wyverns managed to hit me through my mount, setting me on fire, which led to me and my Microraptor's demise. I was not gonna let this stand. Furious, I respawned with haste and quickly gathered the entirety of my wyverns, gathering my legion to be ready for war. Not before they decided to send me to the back rooms. But when I clawed my way out, I got on Singe and rode my wyverns through a sandstorm towards the den. Arriving at the den with my flock, the infestation of wyverns had swarmed out of the den like a pack of rabid wasps. So immediately I engaged this contingent, beginning a war amongst the sandstorm, which frankly left my wyverns at a massive disadvantage. But soon enough, the sands cleared and I began slaughtering the wild wyverns. Not to mention, me claiming Hellfire turned the battle massively into my favor. And soon enough, I was able to destroy the stragglers of the remaining wild wyverns, clearing them out and regathering my forces, where I found that they were really battered from the combat, and not wanting to risk their lives, I decided to just put them aside and go into the den solo with Hellfire. Also focusing on recovering my gear, which was in a less than accessible spot, so I had to... With that acquired, I then went around with Hellfire, clearing out the rest of the den cautiously. However, even into the sunrise of day 35, I hadn't found much else, only leaving with a couple decent eggs, plenty for kibble, and a bunch of talons. Collecting the legion, I went back home, finding that the war was not over as some straggling wyverns laid siege to my outpost, a problem that would persist. So with my flock, I counterattacked the small contingent and cleared them out, and feeling that the outpost would be exposed if I didn't, I decided to leave my flock of wyverns at the outpost to act as sentinels. And now aware of the massive increase in wyvern spawn rates, I knew I would need to acquire more wyverns for my flock in case I ever needed to go to war again. So I gathered together my best eggs, a level 165 fire, a 155 fire, and a 120 poison, where I planned to hatch them all as additions to my legion, but before hatching them, I went about using the fodder eggs to make kibble now that I had gotten a decent amount of honey. Which then, I went about hatching the eggs, naming the first baby fire wyvern Darkfire, naming the other one Heavywing, and naming the low-level poison wyvern Splotch. I also decided to hatch the level 170 lightning egg that I had collected as well, and it ended up hatching out way better than Thunderbolt, so I named it Thunderstorm with the idea that this would be my new main wyvern, which it would be. When the babies eventually grew up, allowing me to do literally anything else, I decided to go back out in search of acros again. Though finally, in the earliest morning of day 36, I finally found a male level 115 and proceeded to... Are you Leaving behind that absolute fumble, I went out looking again, aware that I would need a weaker shotgun, which meant listening to the voices more. And I really came to regret killing that acro, as shocker, I found nothing of interest, even after lapping the map several times. So I switched gears from the rare acro to the even rarer golem. Man, I really hate myself. And while I was able to find another acro, that was pathetically low level, I found nothing even into the night, so I just ended up logging off for the day at the outpost. I was at home in the morning of day 37, organizing my creatures because they were becoming an absolute eyesore, which made me want to try and get the Alpha's Cryo Fridge, which needed an artifact to craft. Which is not why I later went to the church cave, instead going to try and get some cave loot in hopes of getting a slightly weaker shotgun for the acro. Snatching the artifact and completely forgetting that I ever had it, because, yeah, I'm a dumbass, we know this. Which, not finding anything in the cave loot-wise, I went around looking for loot drops and acros. I found nothing useful. So I went to look out for golems, and found nothing. But I did manage to find a decent racer at night, which I tamed. That will never be mentioned again. And in a last-ditch attempt to try and find a golem in day 38, I went out on foot, going to the last place that I had ever seen one, which was on the mountain where I had first gotten metal all the way back in day 3, where atop the cliffs of the mountain, I finally found it! Finally! So, returning home, immediately I went about gathering the preparations I'd need for the tame, taking some extra time to create a rather lazy trap. And then with Toxin and Kaboom Cat, I returned to the mountain and attempted to surround the golem with metal gateways. However, the golem was able to get out pretty easily, so I defaulted to my initial strategy, run and cannon with a pussycat. However, quickly I learned the hard way that aiming the cannon wasn't really the easiest thing, and of course running into a second one proved to be a bit of a hurdle. Compounded with the fact when I actually hit the golem in the head, it was like it took a whole pound of crack and decided to be speed. And eventually, with a combination of it throwing rocks and a stray hyenodon, it destroyed the cannon. Yet I was still determined to get that bastard, so I went about trying to tame it the old-fashioned way, with an RPG, which was fairly difficult with the golem speed buff, me needing to use parachutes to even try and evade it, and was made even harder when my controller died. Shit. No. Shit. Go get in there. Plug in! Eventually getting another cord and plugging in the controller, I managed to get away from the golem and set up on a nearby cliff, where I was a dumbass and shot myself with a rocket, misjudging the distance between me and the golem's noggin. So, in order to try and adjust to where I didn't kill myself, I moved a little bit, but the golem decided to do that for me. But it wasn't too bad, because when I got back, got my stuff, and aimed, I managed to knock it out. Taming it and immediately trying to bring it back home, gathering my things where I found an interesting glitch. Eventually making it home where I threw out my golem, crafted it a saddle, and went out to play with it, and when I was done, I cryoed it so I could throw it out in my fort citadel, but when I threw it out, my game crashed. And to put salt into the wound, it reset me exactly back to when my controller had died. Fortunately, I was able to knock the guy out pretty easily, and this time I tamed it and brought it home and didn't crash. Thankfully. I was out on a war crime spree with Abomination in day 39, out on the look for, you guessed it, Scorched acros, which now were the very last thing that I needed. Instead, I found a shit bug and named it Shiticus. Yup. And then I found an Anki, which I tamed. Yeah, no acros today. So going home, I went around base doing chores and crafting and such, including making even more kibble and expanding the farm with some narco berries, finishing up in the early morning of day 40, which to start my day, I went out looting because I'm a loot goblin, and then I dropped by the Wyvern Den getting a level 140 fire egg, a level 165 lightning, and levels 140, 135, and 105 poison eggs, where I then went back to looking for acros, again, and failing, again, and heading back home, again. Which with these new eggs, I went about hatching them, and when they did, I went about naming them, naming the Lightning Storm Glider, the 135 Poison Corrosive, the 140 Fire Forever Fly, the 105 Poison Blot, and the level 155 Poison Rotwing. However, all these guys were kinda mid. In the morning of day 41, I decided to go out with Thunderstorm looking for, you guessed it, fucking acros. Searching to no avail until I took a break. And returning, feeling that the spawns needed to be left alone, as if that did anything, I decided to try and take a crack at playing with an addition from Bob's Tall Tales, the train. But for that, I would need to get my harvesters and the resources, so I went to the outpost, grabbed them and a bunch of pillars that I had crafted, and then went back home. Returning in the earliest morning of day 42, where I began crafting even more pillars and the other structures that I wanted in order to make a makeshift train station. Spoilers, this never goes anywhere. So for the rest of the day, I went about harvesting materials, crafting pillars, crafting tracks, placing tracks, and repeating that until I got bored and decided to just play with a choo-choo train for 5 minutes, only to forget about it and never touch it again. Being absolutely exhausted of making no progress whatsoever, I went out in day 43 with the intent of finally getting me that acro, but as to not drive myself insane, I decided to tame whatever else I wanted while I was out. Where later, while out looking on Abomination, I ended up getting jumped by 2 worms. And then later after that, I finally managed to find me a good acro, finding a level 135 female. So post-haste, I went about taming it, having some problems with the AI, something that would occur again, and then getting jumped by a worm and tamed. But eventually I managed to knock out and tame the thing, feeling slightly sore as with this gal tamed, I would have been done if I hadn't killed that 115 male. Except not, because the acro mod glitched, and my female didn't actually level up when getting tamed, staying fucking level 135. So, I went ahead and updated the mod, and I then realized that this acro would be completely fucking useless. And feeling massively cheated, I tried to spawn one in, but I failed at that too. Alas, with nothing else to do, I went out looking for yet another acro. Still looking in day 44, where instead of an acro, I found my first alpha deathworm, which I then fought up until sunrise. Then nothing really happened else, because of course nothing happened. And in reaction to the Acro mod needing an update, it got me an idea to experiment with some of the mods that I've been playing with. And with a new Paleo mod for the Rex and the Giga, I decided to download and play with that, turning my vanilla Rexes into those. But after that, I had started noticing that my growing collection of creatures was actually starting to become a problem, creating a very uncomfortable amount of lag, so forgetting entirely that I already had a spare artifact, I went to the Cave of the Gatekeeper, running it with Sandworm, where I got the artifact, got Sandworm stuck in a wall, and eventually walked out. I also had gotten an Ascendant Whip blueprint, which completely stole all of my attention, so I went around trying to get all the resources for the whip, including a ton of silk. So I went out hunting for butterflies, where I ended up coming across a Ceratosaur again, but this time it was the official added version. Fuck, this playthrough went on for way too goddamn long. And with it, it had a child, which if you've watched the ASA series, you know exactly what happens next. After taking a break with the amount of bullshit I had been enduring for a week, I was at home where I went about organizing, then I took Thunderstorm out to go look for Acros yet a fucking again. And the search failed miserably, as even into day 45, nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I went back home before I got bored and started looking again. Then I failed again. I fucking hate this. And this continued into day 46. Nothing, nothing, fucking nothing. Only finding low-level creatures and some baby Ceratosaurs, decent leveled ones that I could play around with, but nothing really important. Returning home in the morning of day 47, I began cleaning up my inventory and throwing out the children I had adopted, allowing them to grow as I went about organizing my stuff and putting away my goodies. If you don't get the memo that I'm always looting, you should really be ashamed of yourself. Going to the farm, filling the crop plots with shit, and collecting the narco berries in order to craft narcotics, which was a main resource that I would need in order to make hemoglobin toxin, a new resource added with the Serrata, which, shocker, was needed in order to tame it. I also went ahead and finally crafted me that damn fridge, putting away all my excess creatures into it, and then going around placing some ACs that I had crafted, in order to hatch an army of Acros, from Acros that I still needed. And to test them out, I decided to breed my Phasalos, hatching my first one shortly after finding it adorably derpy. Oh, look. Look at that derpy-ass underbite. Or overbite, I mean. He was so adorable. Continuing to hatch some more Phasalos, I had my fun until I crashed, and those Phasalos no longer existed, except for the first two. So I decided to go out looking for not Acros! Finally! Instead, I wanted to try and find a Golem, a high-level one. Have you gone fucking mad? I hoped with a high-level one that I would be able to use it to make Serrata taming effortless, but in order for that to happen, I'd need to find that high-level Golem. And as usual, in day 48, I found nothing. Until I did! I managed to finally find an Acro in the Badlands, luring it out to the desert where I began to try and knock it out, dealing with some buggy behavior, which was starting to be an actual problem. But I eventually managed to knock it out and tame her, naming my first Scorched Acro Virus. Bringing her home, I realized that the baby Serratas had grown up, and bored as hell from searching, I decided to take some time to play with them, taking the pack out for a little hunt, returning home to then look for more Acros, reinvigorated after having tamed Virus. However, even into the beginning of day 49, I'd get to find one, though I had started to notice an increase in their spawns, which was promising. And while I was out and about, I managed to find a Racer, which I tamed and named Titanus Derpus. Then I was out looking again, until I got bored and went to the Wyvern Den to continue the war that was totally still going on, by the way, getting a level 175 egg before a sandstorm rolled in, making me have to sit on my ass, where I then went back out looking for Acros and hunting down Serratas for their spines as I would need them for the hemoglobin, which it was while I was looking at two of those where I found a fucking level 120 golem, baby! Yes, yes, yes! So after gathering a bunch of materials at home in the night, not wanting to repeat the first golem tame, I got what I needed for a, frankly, lazy golem trap, returning to the golem in day 50 where that lazy trap didn't work for obvious reasons. So after doing some research on a proper trap and getting the materials for said trap, I went back to the golem and went about properly taming that golem, which after luring it into said trap, I began beating that motherfucker's skull in with a cannon and finally knocking it out, taming it shortly after with kibble and naming them Atlas. And with that guy tamed, I went back out for Acros, finding nothing of note. Until day 51, where I managed to find a max level male Acro with incredible stats. I was finally fucking done with these unbearably long searches. So quickly, I went about taming it, where its AI started to act buggy, which was weird but fine. But then it nearly killed me, which was fine, and then my game crashed, which was concerning, and then returning to where that Acro was supposed to be, I found that Ark had deleted it. I could have gotten around buggy AI. I could have gotten around dying. I could have gotten around dying a dozen times, but I cannot fucking get around Ark just deleting my fucking aggro. And after having searched for 24 in real life hours, dozens of streams, having the first aggro I managed to find glitch out, and now fucking this, I was fed up. So after some research, I managed to figure out how to spawn in a Scorched aggro, getting a male with similar stats to the wild one, and calling it a day, and even feeling guilty, I dropped all the eggs I had been carrying, and the racer I had tamed. And even chat agreed with my decision. If you don't get in chat and tell me otherwise, I don't
Give a single fuck about your opinions.
Anyways, with having a pair of aggros, I finally went about not breeding them for some fucking reason, instead getting distracted by wanting to craft an ascendant saddle for them using one of my blueprints. So I went about collecting the resources for that, where I found a high-level Archaeopteryx in the mountains while I was getting the metal for the saddle, using it to glide my way back home as my wyvern could not carry me. Getting home in day 52, I put away the resources and crafted the saddle, and with that then, I went about breeding for a pair of prime aggros. Remember that word from last time? Get used to it. I'ma use it a lot. Playing around with my various creatures while waiting for generations of aggros to grow, where I went about breeding and raising and breeding and killing, where near the end of the day I managed to breed out 2 prime females, only needing a prime male to maintain the stats for the Legion. Though I detoured my attention instead, thinking that the same reason I had crashed with my first golem was because I had used an alpha cryo, and planning to use Atlas in the future, I did not want to encounter that problem again, and had put him in a regular cryo before, which needed a fridge in order to use. I went about going to craft one of those.
Fuck, I fucked up. I need more metal than that.
Excuse me, bitch! Can I help y'all?
Run away! Run away! Run away!
Okay. Eventually crafting it at the Red Obelisk, where I found all the fucking pearls I'd ever need for this playthrough were just right here for some reason, and I never knew. And because I found that, I spent the early morning of day 53 collecting a ton of them. And then I went back home, continuing my breeding for a prime male breeder. And with the new cryo fridge, I was finally able to throw out Atlas while I was waiting for eggs to lay, gathering a clutch in an attempt to get a perfect male, where I managed to acquire a few, but in the end only using one, which waiting for that boy to grow up, I decided to go out with Atlas and search for Serratos, getting all the resources including my own blood to craft hemoglobin. Which going into the morning of day 54, I went about looking for them, going into the mountains of the Blue Obelisk where I had seen them the most, also finding a ton of golems, which would have been nice about 20 days ago. Alas, none of them were good levels, so I took a nap in the desert. And then going back out on the look where I failed to find a good level Serrato, but I did find a replacement for Tortilla! So taming that guy, I named them Tortilla 2 Taco Food Voodoo, because Electric Boogaloo was unoriginal for some reason. Which then I went back to looking, finding nothing and taking another nap in the desert. And then I woke up and started looking again, where I finally found a decent enough Serrato, which I went about taming, which essentially to do that, you feed your own tame some hemoglobin, and let them get attacked by the Serrato so that the Serrato can get drunk enough to passive tame, and don't look at that, don't look at that, don't look at that, nothing to worry about, nothing to worry about, nothing to worry about, don't look at that, where it eventually got blackout wasted, and I went about feeding it, taming it, and naming it Fang Fear, my first proper tamed Serrato. Completely legit. I was back at breeding and hatching my Acro Legion in day 56, but I was goofing off with friends, so all you can see is a fucked up turkey man. Other than the final hatch, where I eventually got one that was mutated, and it managed to get a health mutation of all things, which was cool. Which then, having all the Acros I needed, hatched, and in cryopods, I knew I'd need an area to raise them properly. So I went ahead and went about crafting some behemoth gates, using them to make a pen atop the cliff above the fort, placing them into the night, and finishing them in the morning of day 57. Then going and collecting some creatures that I could use to get things that I would need for imprinting, including Jeffrey, the Phoenix for meat, and the Roof for berries. I also got some feeding troughs to top it off, finishing it and then beginning the raising of the Legion, where while raising them, I decided to name the mutated baby Acro Beelzebub. And sure enough, I managed to get the entire Legion raised and for the most part imprinted, settling them and organizing them. And with them all grown, all I needed was for them to heal so I could begin leveling them. And still needing a Daedon for the battle army, I went out with Thunderstorm to begin searching. Oh, which that reminds me to fill you in on my plan to fight the Manicore. At this point, it was currently my plan to bring the 2 Fasalos, 3 of my best wyverns of each element, them being so far Toxin, Hellfire, and Thunderstorm, and then bringing 13 Acros, and to top it off, my Yudi and the Daeodon, which I had yet to find even into day 58. So in boredom, I went to the Wyvern Den. Nothing really important happened there. Later though, I did manage to find an adequate enough Daeodon, not really needing a perfect one, so I went about taming it, bringing it home to find the Legion healed enough, so I began the tedious process of leveling them, where I went to a note, proceeded to kill a ton of stuff, including a Titano, where by the morning of day 59, I had finished leveling 5 of them.
Which then after I ended up taking a break, getting extremely busy IRL, taking 3 weeks to stream again. Which when I did stream again, it was for an update. The Arc Club update, which was a mod, and I downloaded that mod, which in turn deleted all of my old ones. And I didn't know that. So when I logged back on, every single fucking modded thing I had was gone. All the resources that were affected with the stacking mod, gone. All my teams that were in cryopods, gone. All my modded creatures, which does in fact include every single fucking acro. All I had to my name was the scrap creatures that I had left out, my harvesters, my fires, and the Fasalos. That's it. But I ended up coming to the idea that this was retribution for all my cheating I have done prior, so I decided to tough through it. Starting the grind, trying to recover the materials I had lost into day 60. Going on and on, grinding and harvesting, clawing my way back to get my resources, managing to get my OP Tranks, which had also disappeared. Not before Power Surge, which this Power Surge turned off my system and reset my world back to when I had first started grinding. And I was done. I was tired of all the bullshit. So far it had been 3 months of recording and nothing but glitches, so I said fuck it and just spawned in all the stuff that I needed, including a pair of acros. Even now, I really don't give a fuck that I did any of this. In fact, if I hadn't, I'd probably still be playing even as the script is being written, or even as it's being edited, or even as it's being released. So I apologize if this does get under your nerves, but honestly, shove it. I'm not playing Scorched Earth for 6 months. With these new acros, I went about breeding out a new prime pair, not being so fed up as to not want to rebreed a whole new legion. Going about that for the rest of day 60. Breeding out my first couple, which I decided to name Abomination Reborn and Earthquake Reawakened, as I was still really fucking sore about losing everything. Eventually, after sunset, I managed to get a male acro that had gotten a melee mutation and was also green. So I went about waiting for it to grow up so I could hopefully spread that mutation and color onto the prime pair I was working to make, naming that baby Dew. And in the morning of day 61, baby Dew grew up and I continued breeding, eventually getting a male that was better than Dew, so I had to replace Dew with them. And then I got an identical female, and what do we call that? A prime pair! But before breeding out a legion, I ended up getting a better male. So instead of breeding out a legion, I went at work trying to get another female to increase the breeding speed, which in the morning of day 62, I managed to do just that, and then began breeding out the eggs needed for the legion. Though after taking a break and logging back in, it reset back to the beginning of day 62 before I got the trio. So I went about getting that back, eventually doing that and only needing to wait for a female to grow up. So I went around with my chainsaw, getting an absurd amount of meat, and there's no fucking audio. God. Anyways, when it grew up, I began breeding out the eggs for the Legion, collecting all the eggs I needed in the night, beginning to hatch them in the beginning of day 63, doing so in clutches to ensure that they were all taken care of properly and imprinted to perfection. Starting with the first clutch, which one of the acros had managed to get a mutation. One that was pretty useless, but made the acro baby look gorgeous, attaining an orange coloration, so I decided to name her Runa. I thereafter went about hatching the second clutch, where I ended up getting a pair of twins that were mutated as well, with yet another useless mutation, but they were fucking pink, so I was happy, and named them Scarlet and Rouge. The third clutch wasn't special, but in the fourth and final clutch, I managed to get a baby with a health mutation that had also gotten another layer of green into its coloring. Truly, this was Beelzebub Reborn, so that's what I named them, and then waited for the rest of them to grow up, imprinting them, settling them, and then organizing them. Finally having my Legion of Acros for the second time. Which, with that done, I just needed them to heal, planning on cheat leveling 6 of them because yes, I was that fucking salty. But before letting them heal, I took another 3-week break. returning to go and run the den, which was of no consequence, so we're just gonna ignore that. Finishing the run in the morning of day 64, and going home to find the acros adequately healed, so I cheat leveled some of them, as I said I would, and then went about leveling the rest of them, going one by one, finding and exploring out, hunting, killing, and leveling, which while doing that, I found a level 130 Daeodon, which I tamed as a suitable replacement for the last one, naming it Fat Fuff, which soon enough I had finished leveling in the early morning of day 65. Thus, I went about getting the final piece of my army, a Utyrannus. So I went about looking, killing myself to no avail as I found nothing, getting distracted by the den, but eventually in day 66, I was eventually able to find a passable UD to tame, which while taming that one, another one was becoming a problem, so I knocked that one out too, finding that it was level 110. So I tamed those two, finding a level 120 later, which I also tamed. Bringing them home, I saddled the highest level, naming them Psycho, finding that their stats were bad, so I saddled the second highest one, naming her Tyrantrump, as it was a funny name, and then went about leveling her, finishing with her to then go do the same with the Daeodon. Finishing in day 67, the Legion was finally complete. So I went about organizing the entirety of it in preparation for when I was going to go fight the boss, which was the next stream, gathering together the Legion and making my way to the Red Obelisk, flying over the Wyverns first because they were laggy, and then marching the Legion of Vakros towards the Red Obelisk. 67 days, 54 streams, and 85 hours spent on this playthrough. By far my longest, most frustrating, most fun, and most refreshing experience I've had yet on this game. One that I both hated and loved was finally coming to an end. As I gathered my Legion around the obelisk pedestal and began the teleporter, I readied myself for my final challenge. Having beaten the harsh weathers of this desert, conquering the sands and the skies, claiming dragon and monster alike, getting ruthlessly beaten by bugs and glitches, now to come to this. My final fight in these ruthless sands. Let's do this. Laggy. No casualties. Let's go in the third person. Oh, baby, look at that element. Get it, boys. Oh, baby. We finally fucking did it. I am done with Scorched.
You continue to impress.
I hope you all enjoyed that video. Trust me, it took a lot of work to get it done. Now, I'll make this outro short and sweet as I have a lot of yapping to do. So for those leaving, I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace. Alright, for those staying, I must sorely apologize, not only for the wait for this project, not only for the increase in cheating, not only for the amount of time it's taken to make this, and not only for the delay that editing has caused to the ASA series. Actually, that's all I wanted to say sorry for. It means so much that everyone watches this content, not to mention how many have actually begun to. So I'm so sorry for the inconsistent schedule that I have. I can't lie, I don't really have a plan. And as my life is very chaotic and busy, it leaves little room for consistency. But I can promise you that my content will at least become better and better as the year goes on. Alrighty, I'm done yapping. So I'd like to say one more time, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, I love y'all, and see you guys in the next video. Peace. Also, 100 Days Aberration is gonna take a while, I'm sorry.